1 year had passed since humanity first made contact with the Galactic Council. In that time, everything had changed. Earth had gone from being an isolated world to becoming a crucial part of galactic civilization. Ambassador Lisa Grant stood in the newly constructed Interspecies Cultural Center in Geneva and watched the results of that transformation. Children from Earth played alongside young aliens in specially designed playgrounds where the gravity and atmosphere could be adjusted for different species. Human teachers worked with alien educators to develop shared curriculum. Scientists from hundreds of worlds collaborated on research projects. It was beautiful and chaotic and full of hope. Lisa had been appointed as Earth's primary representative to the Council after the success of earlier missions had proven humanity's value. She was a diplomat by training, but had learned to be flexible as the situation demanded. Today she was meeting with a delegation of Council representatives who had a proposal. Kresh, the small Porvian who had been friendly to humans from the beginning, led the group. There were also representatives from the Velkrin, the Helians, the Tarvox, and several other species. They gathered in a meeting room that had become familiar to Lisa over the past months. Kresh began the presentation. The Porvian explained that the Galactic Council had identified 17 worlds that were classified as uninhabitable. These worlds possessed valuable resources, including rare minerals, unique biological compounds, and strategic locations. For centuries, these worlds had been considered too dangerous for permanent settlement or even regular work crews. The costs of attempting to utilize these worlds had always exceeded the potential benefits. But humanity had changed that calculation. The demonstrations on Krix and the success of mixed human-alien crews had proven that humans could work in conditions other species couldn't handle. The proposal was straightforward. The Council wanted to contract human teams to establish operations on these death worlds. Humans would build bases, extract resources, conduct research, and eventually establish permanent colonies if possible. In return, humanity would gain full voting membership in the Galactic Council, access to advanced technologies, favorable trade agreements, and territorial rights to the worlds they developed. It was an enormous opportunity, but also a significant commitment. Lisa listened carefully to the entire proposal before responding. She asked about specifics. What kind of support would the Council provide? What were the safety requirements? How would profits be shared? What guarantees did humanity have that they wouldn't simply be exploited as laborers in dangerous environments? The questions were important, and the Council representatives had clearly anticipated them. They provided detailed answers about resource allocation, technological support, legal protections, and profit-sharing arrangements. The terms were actually quite generous. A Velkrin named Yathar spoke up. The crystalline being's colors shifted to patterns indicating sincerity. Yathar said that the Council understood this arrangement had to be mutually beneficial. They weren't looking for cheap labor. They were recognizing that humans had capabilities that were genuinely unique and valuable. Those capabilities should be rewarded appropriately. Moreover, the Council members had come to respect humanity over the past year. They had seen that humans were more than just physically tough. They were innovative, adaptable, and cooperative. These were qualities the galaxy needed. Lisa asked for time to consult with Earth's government before giving an official answer. The Council representatives agreed and the meeting adjourned. Over the next week, Lisa communicated constantly with officials on Earth. There were debates and discussions about the implications. Some worried that accepting the proposal would mean humans were being used as tools by more advanced civilizations. Others saw it as an opportunity to secure humanity's place in galactic society and gain access to resources and technologies that would benefit everyone. Eventually, a consensus emerged. Earth would accept the proposal, but with additional protections and conditions to ensure fair treatment. The negotiations took another month. Human lawyers and diplomats worked with Council legal experts to draft agreements that satisfied everyone. The final contract was comprehensive and detailed. It guaranteed human rights and safety standards. It established clear profit-sharing formulas. It provided for technology transfers and educational exchanges. It created frameworks for eventual human colonization of developed worlds. When everything was finalized, Lisa signed the agreement on behalf of Earth in a ceremony attended by representatives from across the galaxy. The first teams were deployed within weeks. Groups of human specialists traveled to worlds that had been abandoned or never settled. They brought with them a mix of human technology and Council equipment. They established bases in environments that ranged from merely difficult to genuinely extreme. Some worlds had crushing gravity, others had toxic atmospheres. Some experienced temperature swings that would shatter most materials. A few had all of these problems and more. The human teams approached each challenge systematically. They adapted techniques from Earth's history of extreme environment work. They combined that experience with alien technology to create solutions that neither humans nor aliens could have developed alone. Reports started coming back. A mining operation on a high-gravity world was extracting rare elements at rates that exceeded all projections. A research station on a world with a corrosive atmosphere had discovered new chemical compounds with remarkable properties. An agricultural team had successfully grown food crops on a planet with extreme seasonal variations, proving that long-term habitation was possible. Every success reinforced the value of human participation in galactic civilization. Lisa found herself dealing with unexpected problems. Success brought attention, and attention brought complications. Some council species began expressing concern about human expansion. They worried that humanity's advantage in harsh environments would lead to them dominating certain sectors. Others were jealous of the favorable terms humans had negotiated. There were even a few species that seemed genuinely afraid of humans, viewing them as potential threats because of their physical capabilities and adaptability. Lisa addressed these concerns through patient diplomacy and clear communication. She emphasized that humanity didn't want to dominate anyone. They wanted to participate as equals and contribute their unique abilities to the common good. She pointed out that every species in the council had their own strengths and advantages. The Velcrin were unmatched in certain scientific fields. The Porvians were master engineers. The Helians had energy manipulation abilities humans could never replicate. Humanity's strength in harsh environments didn't make them superior. It just made them different. The galaxy was big enough for everyone to find their place. A turning point came when a crisis erupted in a border region. A council research station on a relatively safe world was hit by an unexpected natural disaster. A massive volcanic eruption threatened to destroy the station and kill everyone there. The nearest rescue ships were days away. The only vessel close enough to help was a human cargo ship that had been transporting supplies to one of the new mining operations. The ship was captained by a woman named Ellen Brooks who didn't hesitate when she received the distress call. Ellen diverted her ship to the research station and arrived to find the situation deteriorating rapidly. The volcanic eruption had triggered earthquakes and toxic gas releases. The station was partially collapsed and the survivors were trapped in sections that were slowly being consumed by lava flows. Ellen's crew consisted of herself and 3 other humans plus 2 Porvian mechanics. They assessed the situation and realized they had maybe 4 hours before everyone in the station would be dead. The plan was dangerous. They would have to land near the station, navigate through an environment filled with toxic gases and extreme heat, find the survivors, and get them out. Ellen's crew suited up in heavy protective gear and went in. The conditions would have been lethal to most species even with suits. For humans, they were survivable if barely. The crew moved through collapsed corridors and burning sections. They found survivors huddled in a shielded laboratory that was the last safe zone in the station. There were 7 aliens, all terrified and some injured. Getting everyone out took 3 trips because the human ship wasn't large enough to carry everyone at once, plus the fact that moving the injured through the disaster zone was slow. Ellen and her crew worked for hours in heat that was causing their suits to fail, and breathing air that was filtered but still acrid. They got all 7 survivors out. They got them onto the ship. They lifted off just before the station was completely engulfed. When they arrived at the nearest council facility, Ellen and her crew were exhausted and their suits were ruined, but everyone was alive. The rescue made news across the council networks. Ellen became something of a celebrity, though she seemed uncomfortable with the attention. She told reporters that she had just done what anyone would do in that situation, but the council members knew better. The aliens Ellen had rescued were very clear in their statements. No one else could have done what the humans did. The conditions had been beyond what any other species could survive. The success on Crix changed everything. Humanity had proven they could work in environments that other species considered impossible. The Galactic Council began seeing humans not as curious newcomers, but as valuable specialists. Lieutenant Chris Taylor was assigned to the first joint human-alien expedition into unexplored space. His team would work alongside some of the Council's best scientists and explorers. It was meant to be a symbol of cooperation and an opportunity for both sides to learn from each other. Chris was young for a command position, but he had experience that mattered. He had grown up in Alaska where survival skills were taught alongside regular education. He had served in the Space Exploration Corps in various hostile environment training programs. He knew how to keep calm when things went wrong and how to make decisions under pressure. His team was equally qualified. Sophie Blake was a navigator with an intuitive understanding of spatial relationships and stellar mechanics. Ryan Cooper served as security officer and had trained in emergency response procedures for every kind of crisis anyone could imagine. Megan Torres handled communications and had a gift for languages that extended to learning alien communication systems. The mission ship was called Endeavour, and it was a joint construction project combining human engineering with Council technology. The result was a vessel that could handle rougher conditions than standard Council ships, while also incorporating the advanced sensors and faster-than-light drive that the Council had perfected over centuries. The crew was mixed. Besides the 4 humans, there was Zothan, a Velcrin scientist whose crystalline body pulsed with colors that indicated excitement about the mission. There were 2 Porvian engineers named Kesh and Lyra, who were specialists in ship systems. A Helion military advisor called Thonvar rounded out the crew. The Helion was a tall being made of living energy held together by a containment suit. The first week of the mission went smoothly. They were exploring a region called the Vortex Sector, an area of space known for unstable stellar activity and unusual planetary formations. It was the kind of place that required careful navigation and constant monitoring. Sophie handled the navigation with confidence while the alien crew members provided valuable input from their own expertise. Chris found himself impressed by how well the mixed crew worked together. There were communication challenges and cultural differences, but everyone was professional and focused on the mission. The second week tested everyone. They were investigating an unusual stellar phenomenon when their sensors detected a massive solar flare building in a nearby star. The flare erupted faster and stronger than predicted. The wave of radiation and charged particles hit them before they could jump to faster-than-light speeds. The ship's shields held, but several systems were damaged. Sophie immediately calculated an emergency course to the nearest safe location. That turned out to be a moon orbiting a gas giant in a system they hadn't fully surveyed yet. The emergency landing was rough. Sophie brought them down through an atmosphere that was thicker than anticipated, while dealing with reduced engine power and failing guidance systems. Chris watched her work and noted that she never hesitated or showed fear. She simply processed the information and made corrections as needed. The landing was harder than ideal, but they were down and intact. That was what mattered. Once they were settled, Chris ordered everyone to assess the situation. The news wasn't good. The solar flare had damaged their faster-than-light drive beyond the ability to repair with onboard resources. Their communication array was also fried. They could send a distress beacon, but at sublight speeds it would take days for any rescue to reach them. In the meantime, they were stuck on this moon. Zothan provided analysis of the external environment. The surface temperature during the day reached levels that were merely uncomfortable for humans, but dangerous for most of the alien crew. At night it dropped to temperatures that would kill the aliens within hours, even in their suits. Ryan was already going through their emergency supplies. He reported that they had enough food and water for 2 weeks if they were careful. The ship's life support was functioning on backup power, but that wouldn't last more than a few days. They needed to find alternative shelter. Chris asked Sophie to scan for caves or any natural formations that could protect them. While she worked on that, Chris and Ryan suited up to do a perimeter check. Outside the ship, the environment was harsh but manageable. The moon had a thin atmosphere that provided some protection from radiation, but not much. The gravity was lighter than Earth, but heavier than most Council worlds preferred. Rocky terrain stretched in all directions. Chris and Ryan moved efficiently, checking the area around the ship and looking for any immediate threats or resources. They spotted a cave system about 2 kilometers from their landing site. That would be their backup shelter if needed. When they returned to the ship, the situation inside had become tense. The alien crew members were showing signs of stress. Zothan's colors were flashing in patterns that indicated anxiety. Kesh and Lyra were moving nervously, their fur standing on end. Thonvar's energy form was fluctuating in ways that suggested the Helion was struggling to maintain composure. They were all looking at the temperature readings and calculating survival odds. The math wasn't encouraging for them. Chris called everyone together. He spoke calmly and clearly. They had a situation, but they had options. The cave system could provide shelter. They had supplies. They had sent a distress beacon and rescue would come. What they needed now was to work together and stay focused. Ryan added that the humans had training for exactly this kind of situation. The aliens should trust that training and follow the plan. Megan started organizing supplies that would need to be transported to the cave. Sophie pulled up detailed scans of the cave system to identify the best location for a temporary camp. The next several hours were spent moving essential supplies and equipment to the cave. It was hard physical work. The humans took the heaviest loads, their stronger bodies making the task easier. They helped the alien crew members navigate the rough terrain. Ryan and Chris went ahead to set up lights and mark the safe path. Megan stayed back to help Kesh and Lyra, who were struggling with the gravity and the physical exertion. Sophie did multiple trips carrying equipment and helping Zothan, whose crystalline body wasn't designed for this kind of movement. The cave system was extensive, but they found a chamber that was large enough for the whole crew and had relatively stable temperature and atmosphere. Greg got to work setting up portable heaters and life support units. The technology was a mix of human and council designs. The council equipment was more efficient, but the human gear was more rugged. It took both types working together to create a stable environment in the cave. By the time night fell outside, they had a functioning shelter that would keep everyone alive. That first night was difficult. The temperature outside dropped rapidly. The cave protected them from the worst of it, but it was still cold. The aliens huddled near the heaters while the humans did regular checks of the equipment and the cave perimeter. Chris established a watch rotation. The humans would take longer shifts since they were better adapted to the conditions. During his watch, Chris noticed Zothan was still awake, colors pulsing slowly. The Velcrin approached and asked how Chris could remain so calm. They were stranded on a hostile moon with limited resources and uncertain rescue. By all logical calculation, this should be a crisis situation. Chris thought about how to explain. He said that this situation was serious but not hopeless. They had shelter, supplies, and a plan. That was more than many humans had faced in Earth's history and survived. He told Zothan about early human explorers who had gotten stranded in Arctic regions or remote islands. They had survived for months or even years with far less than what this crew had available. The second day, everyone fell into a routine. The humans would go outside to check the distress beacon and monitor for any signs of rescue ships. They would gather data on the moon's environment and resources. The aliens stayed mostly in the cave, conserving energy and working on repairs to some of the salvaged equipment. Megan made a point of keeping everyone's spirits up. She told stories about human exploration and shared music from Earth. She got Kesh and Lyra laughing at jokes that the translator did its best to convey. Ryan shared some of his ration packs, which turned out to be safe for alien consumption and surprisingly tasty. According to Thonvar, Sophie spent hours with Zothan discussing the stellar phenomenon that had caused their situation. It was actually a fascinating scientific event, and Sophie's enthusiasm for the data they had gathered was infectious. The Velcrin found itself getting interested despite the circumstances. They worked together to compile a report that would be valuable to council scientists. The work gave them both something productive to focus on. By the third day, the rescue ship arrived. Chris and his team had managed to keep everyone safe and even maintain morale during what should have been a terrifying situation. As they boarded the rescue vessel, Thonvar spoke to Chris. The Helion said that it had been skeptical about humans. They seemed reckless and overly confident. But now Thonvar understood. Humans weren't fearless. They were simply experienced with crisis. 3 months had passed since humanity's introduction to the Galactic Council, and the revelation that Earth was considered a death world. The initial shock had faded, but the implications continued to ripple through galactic society. Commander Ben Walker was about to demonstrate exactly what those implications meant in practical terms. He stood in a council briefing room listening to a dispute that had been ongoing for decades between two member species, the Helion Republic and the Tarvok. Union both claimed rights to a planet called Kryx. The planet was rich in rare minerals, essential for advanced technology, but neither species could establish a lasting presence there. The mediator, A floating gas being named Orthex explained the situation with obvious frustration. Crix was classified as a Class 7 death world. The gravity was too high for most species. The atmosphere contained corrosive elements. Temperature swings were extreme. Weather patterns were violent and unpredictable. Both the Helians and Tarvox had tried to set up mining operations multiple times, and each attempt had ended in evacuation or disaster. Ben listened carefully while his team reviewed the planetary data. His team consisted of Amy Chen, a pilot with nerves of steel and a gift for flying in difficult conditions. Greg Phillips was an engineer who could fix anything with whatever materials were available. Kate Murphy served as their xenoculture specialist and diplomat. All three were reviewing the information about Crix on their tablets, and Ben could see they were reaching the same conclusion he was. He waited for Orthex to finish the briefing, then spoke up. He said that Crix didn't sound that different from certain regions on Earth. Greg had already pulled up comparative data showing that Crix's gravity was only slightly higher than Earth normal. The temperature range was similar to what humans experienced in desert regions. The atmospheric corrosion was roughly equivalent to industrial pollution levels that humans had dealt with for centuries. The violent weather was comparable to hurricane zones. Orthex's gaseous form swirled in patterns that indicated confusion. The being asked if Ben was suggesting that humans could survive on Crix. Ben said more than that. He proposed that his team would establish a surface base on Crix and maintain it for 30 standard days. If they succeeded, perhaps they could help mediate the dispute from a position of actually understanding the planet. The council representatives looked at each other in their various ways. Some seemed skeptical, others appeared curious. Eventually, they agreed to the demonstration. Preparations took 2 weeks. The human team was given access to council technology and materials, but they insisted on using equipment rated for their own standards, rather than trusting alien gear that might not hold up under Earth normal conditions. Amy selected a landing site near one of the richest mineral deposits. Greg designed a habitat dome using principles from Earth's Antarctic research stations and deep-sea facilities. Kate prepared documentation and communication protocols. The landing itself was rough. Crix's atmosphere created turbulence that would have grounded most Council species ships. Amy navigated through it with the kind of casual skill that came from learning to fly in Earth's chaotic weather patterns. She set the lander down within meters of the target zone, despite winds that were howling at speeds that would be considered extreme by galactic standards. Ben watched the external cameras as dust and debris battered against their hull. It looked like a typical spring day in Kansas during tornado season. They suited up and stepped outside. The suits were modified versions of Earth design, heavily reinforced to handle the conditions. The gravity pulled at them, but it was manageable. Ben had grown up in a higher gravity training facility, so this felt almost normal. The team got to work immediately. First priority was establishing the habitat dome. Greg had designed it to be assembled in sections. Each section had to be anchored into the rocky ground using pitons that could withstand the wind forces. It was hard physical labor, but the team was used to that. Council observers watched via remote cameras. Ben could imagine their reactions as they saw humans working in conditions that would require emergency extraction for any other species. The first day was spent getting the basic dome structure up. The second day, they installed the life support systems and power generators. By the third day, they had a functioning habitat that could protect them from the external environment. It wasn't comfortable, but it was safe, and that was what mattered. The real work began after that. Greg started analyzing the mineral deposits using both Council-provided scanners and Earth-made equipment. He found that the scanners from the Council were designed for gentler environments and kept malfunctioning in Crix's harsh conditions. The Earth equipment, built to survive everything from desert heat to Arctic cold, worked fine. Within a week, Greg had mapped out mineral deposits across a 100-square-kilometer area. The data was more detailed than anything either the Helians or Tarvox had managed to gather in all their previous attempts. Amy spent her time studying the weather patterns. She took the lander up during what the Council considered dangerously violent conditions. She flew through storms that were battering the surface with wind and electrical activity. Her reports back were casual and matter-of-fact. She noted that visibility was poor but manageable. She mentioned that the turbulence was significant, but nothing worse than flying through a thunderstorm over the Atlantic. She said that with proper instrumentation and training, Regular supply flights to Crix would be entirely feasible. Kate focused on communication. She maintained daily check-ins with the Council observers and started compiling a comprehensive report on Crix's actual conditions versus the perceived dangers. She interviewed the human team members about their experiences. She compared those experiences to accounts from previous non-human attempts to work on Crix. The differences were stark. What the humans considered minor inconveniences had been considered critical survival situations by other species. By day 10, they had established a hydroponics bay inside the habitat. Greg had modified the design to account for Crix's higher gravity and unusual atmospheric composition. The plants were earth varieties selected for hardiness, tomatoes and potatoes and leafy greens that could tolerate less than ideal conditions. Within days, the plants were growing, not just surviving but actually thriving. The Council observers were stunned. The idea of agriculture on a Class 7 death world was outside their experience. Day 15 brought a major storm. The wind speeds exceeded anything they had experienced so far. The atmospheric pressure fluctuations were extreme. The Council observers sent urgent messages recommending evacuation. Ben reviewed the data and checked the habitat's structural integrity. Everything was holding. The dome was shaking and the noise was incredible, but they were safe. He sent back a message saying they were staying. The storm lasted 18 hours. When it was over, the habitat had a few minor leaks that Greg patched in an afternoon. They continued their work. Amy started asking if she could go running outside. She said the habitat felt confining and she needed exercise. Ben checked the suit specifications and the external conditions. He cleared her for short runs near the habitat. The Council observers watched in disbelief as a human voluntarily went outside during what they considered hazardous conditions and jogged around in circles for exercise. Amy's report afterward noted that the gravity made it a better workout than running on Earth, and she was pleased with that. By day 20, they had moved beyond just surviving. They were comfortable. The habitat had been improved with better insulation and more living space. The hydroponics bay was producing fresh vegetables. Greg had established a small workshop where he was building better tools for mineral extraction. Kate had compiled enough data to write a detailed guide on how to safely work on Crix. Amy had mapped out safe flight corridors and weather prediction patterns. They weren't just demonstrating that humans could survive on Crix, they were showing that humans could actually thrive there. The final 10 days were spent doing more intensive mineral surveying. Ben led teams outside on multi-hour expeditions into rough terrain. They collected samples and mapped deposits and took readings that would be valuable for any future mining operations. The work was hard and the conditions were challenging, but the team approached it with the kind of steady professionalism that came from being trained in difficult environments. When Council observers commented on how difficult the work must be, Kate's response became famous in Council circles. She said they weren't thriving, they were just working, and there was a difference. Day 30 arrived and the human team packed up their equipment. They left the habitat dome intact as a gift to the Council. It could serve as a base for future operations. They boarded their lander, and Amy flew them back to orbit through another violent storm. The Council representatives who had been observing the mission gathered for a final debriefing. Ben presented their findings and recommendations. He suggested that with human assistance, Crix could support a permanent mining operation that would benefit both the Helians and Tarvox. Orthex spoke for the Council. The gas being said that what the humans had accomplished was remarkable. A mission that would have been considered extreme survival for any other species had been treated as routine work by humans. The news spread through the Galactic Council networks like wildfire. Humanity, the new species that had just achieved faster-than-light travel, came from a death world. Within days, every major news outlet across hundreds of planets was talking about it. Scientists requested meetings. Military advisors wanted assessments. Cultural experts tried to understand what this meant for galactic society. Nicole Hayes found herself at the center of this storm. Nicole was a captain in Earth's newly formed Space Exploration Corps. She had been selected to lead the second wave of human ambassadors to the Council station. Her mission was supposed to be simple: establish trade agreements and cultural exchange programs. Instead, she walked into a situation where every species in the galaxy was either fascinated or terrified by humans. The orbital station called Unity had been designated as the primary meeting point for human-alien interaction. Nicole arrived with a team of specialists and found the docking bay crowded with alien observers. Her second in command was a man named Peter Walsh, a former Marine who had transitioned to diplomatic service. He was calm under pressure and had a gift for reading body language even when the bodies in question had entirely different structures than humans. Also on her team was Dr. Henry Foster, the chief medical officer, and Karen Phillips, a xenobiologist who had spent the last year studying every piece of alien biology data Earth had received. They made their way through the curious crowds to their assigned quarters. The quarters were designed for human comfort, which itself was interesting. The gravity was set to Earth standard, much higher than the station's normal setting. The atmospheric mix matched Earth's oxygen-rich air. The temperature was warmer than most species preferred. Nicole realized that the Council had created what amounted to a hazardous environment zone just so humans could feel at home. That thought was both amusing and slightly concerning. Their first official meeting was scheduled for the next day, but Nicole barely had time to settle in before visitors started arriving. The first was Kresh, the small Porvian who had been present at the initial contact with Jake Harrison's team. Kresh was friendly and curious, asking questions about human culture and biology with the enthusiasm of a scientist who had just discovered a new element. Nicole found herself liking the little alien despite the language barrier and the strangeness of the situation. Kresh brought along a team of xenobiologists from various species. They wanted to conduct medical scans of the human delegation, with permission, of course. Dr. Henry Foster agreed immediately, seeing it as an opportunity to gather data on alien biology as well. The scanning session took hours. The alien scientists used devices that hummed and beeped and projected colorful lights. They took samples of hair and skin cells. They measured bone density and muscle mass. They analyzed blood chemistry and neural patterns. Through it all, they maintained a running commentary that the translators converted into excited exclamations of disbelief. One of the scientists, an insectoid being with multiple arms and compound eyes, kept clicking its mandibles in what the translator called nervous laughter. It said that human bone density was absurd. It said that human muscles were packed with redundant fiber systems that provided strength far beyond what their frame suggested. It pointed out that humans had a skeletal system designed to support weight in high gravity, while also maintaining flexibility. The clicking continued as it noted that human skin was remarkably tough, containing multiple layers of protection against radiation and physical damage. Henry was taking notes furiously on his tablet. He asked questions about how human biology compared to galactic norms. The answers were startling. The average galactic species had bones that were lighter and more porous. Their muscles were efficient but not particularly strong. Their skin was thin and sensitive. They had evolved on worlds where such traits were sufficient because their environments were stable and predictable. They had never needed to develop the kind of robust physicality that humans possessed. Karen Phillips pointed out something interesting. She said that humans weren't actually the strongest or toughest species on Earth. She pulled up images of Earth animals like elephants and rhinoceros and gorillas. She showed pictures of creatures that lived in extreme environments like deep sea fish and Arctic wolves. She explained that Earth was full of life that had adapted to survive in harsh conditions, and humans were just one example among many. This seemed to disturb the alien scientists even more. The idea that an entire planet's ecosystem was built on such intense survival pressures was outside their experience. The insectoid scientist asked about human recreational activities. Karen wasn't sure why that was relevant until the question was clarified. The aliens had been reviewing human cultural databases and were confused by many things they found. They wanted to know why humans voluntarily engaged in activities that appeared dangerous. Nicole found herself trying to explain concepts like rock climbing and skydiving and scuba diving. She talked about how humans enjoyed challenging themselves physically and mentally. She mentioned sports like football and rugby where physical contact was part of the game. The aliens listened with what seemed like horror. Kresh said that most civilized species engaged in recreational activities that were safe and mentally stimulating. They played strategy games and created art and engaged in social bonding activities. The idea of voluntarily putting oneself in danger for fun was almost incomprehensible. Peter Walsh laughed and said that humans got bored easily. He said they needed excitement and challenge to feel alive. The translator struggled with that concept. Then the conversation shifted to human diet. Dr. Foster had brought samples of common human foods as gifts. He offered chocolate to the gathered scientists. Most refused to even touch it after their scanners identified the theobromine content. One brave Velcrin named Orthan took a small piece and consumed it. The crystal being's colors immediately began flashing in distress. The translator said Orthan was experiencing what humans would call a stimulant overdose from a single small piece of chocolate. Henry quickly provided an antidote compound and Orthan recovered, but the point was made. Human recreational foods contained compounds that were toxic to most other species. Karen pulled up a list of common human consumables: coffee with its caffeine, alcohol with its ethanol, spicy peppers with their capsaicin, tea with its various alkaloids. Even simple things like citrus fruits contained acid levels that could harm species with less robust digestive systems. The aliens realized that humans regularly consumed mild poisons for pleasure. They did it so routinely that they had entire industries built around producing and distributing these substances. The insectoid scientist said this was another example of death world adaptation. On harsher planets, being able to consume a wider variety of substances without harm was a survival advantage. The meeting continued for hours and moved from biology to culture. The aliens wanted to understand human history. Nicole tried to explain human civilization in broad terms, but kept getting interrupted by shocked reactions. She mentioned that humans had survived an ice age. The aliens didn't understand how a pre-technological species could survive a planetary climate shift. She explained about migration and tool use and the control of fire. She talked about how different human groups had adapted to different environments, from frozen tundras to burning deserts to humid jungles. Each adaptation impressed the aliens more. Kresh asked about human conflict. Nicole hesitated because this was a sensitive topic. She admitted that humans had a long history of warfare. She explained that competition for resources on a harsh planet had led to conflicts between groups. She tried to emphasize that modern humanity had moved past most of that they had learned cooperation and built a global civilization, but she could see the concern in the aliens' reactions. They were realizing that humans weren't just physically tough. They had experience with organized violence on a scale most council species had never known. Peter stepped in to clarify. He said that yes, humans had fought wars, but they had also built art and music and literature. They had developed philosophy and science and medicine. They had created complex societies with laws and ethics. Their harsh world had made them strong, but it had also taught them the value of cooperation. Humans understood that working together was often the only way to survive. That understanding had eventually led to peace on Earth and now to their reaching out to the stars. The aliens seemed to process this information in various ways. Some appeared thoughtful. Others seemed nervous. Kresh was openly fascinated and kept asking more questions. As the meeting finally wound down, Nicole felt exhausted but also strangely proud. Humanity was different. That was clear. But different didn't have to mean bad. It just meant they had a unique perspective to offer the galaxy. Jake Harrison stood on the bridge of the frontier and watched the massive alien station grow larger on the viewing screen. He had dreamed of this moment since he was a boy reading about space exploration in his grandfather's old books. Humanity had finally done it. They had built ships that could travel faster than light, and now they were about to meet the Galactic Council for the first time. The journey from Earth had taken 3 weeks, and every day had been filled with preparation and nervousness. Jake ran a hand through his dark hair and straightened his uniform. Beside him stood Linda Morrison, his science officer, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. She was reviewing data on her tablet, but Jake could see the excitement in the way her hands moved just a bit too quickly. The communication panel beeped, and a voice came through, translated into English by their computer system. The voice sounded strange, like wind chimes mixed with distant thunder. It said the council was ready to receive them and provided docking instructions. Jake acknowledged and guided the frontier toward the designated bay. The station was enormous, easily 10 times larger than anything humans had ever built. It gleamed with lights of colors Jake had never seen before, and ships of various designs moved around it like fish in a vast ocean. Docking was smooth, and soon Jake found himself walking down the ramp with Linda and 2 other crew members, Carl Bennett and Nina Torres. They stepped into a corridor that seemed to shift colors as they walked. The air smelled different. Not bad, but not quite right either, like flowers mixed with metal. At the end of the corridor stood their welcoming committee. Jake had seen pictures of aliens in the data packets Earth had received, but seeing them in person was something else entirely. The tallest figure was clearly the leader. It stood nearly 8 feet high, and its body seemed to be made of crystal that pulsed with different colors. Jake remembered from the briefings that this was a Velcrin, a species known for their scientific achievements. Next to the Velcrin stood a small furry creature that barely reached Jake's waist with large eyes and delicate hands. That would be a Porvian. There were others too, beings of various shapes and sizes, all watching the humans with what Jake hoped was curiosity, rather than hostility. The Velcrin stepped forward, and its colors shifted in patterns. The translator device Linda carried spoke in that same wind chime voice. It said its name was Zothar, and it welcomed humanity to the Galactic Council. Jake introduced himself and his team, following the diplomatic protocols they had practiced for months. Zothar's colors changed again, and the translator said the council was eager to learn about Earth and its people. That seemed like a good sign. They were led through the station to a large meeting room. The room had seating designed for many different body types, and the humans found chairs that were close enough to comfortable. A large holographic display floated in the center of the room. Zothar began asking questions, basic ones at first. How many people lived on Earth? What kind of government did they have? What technologies had they developed? Jake answered as best he could, with Linda providing technical details when needed. Then Zothar asked to see images of Earth. Linda activated her tablet and projected pictures onto the holographic display. There was Earth from space, blue and white and beautiful. There were images of cities and forests and oceans. There were pictures of mountains and deserts and polar ice caps. Jake watched the aliens as they looked at the images. Something was wrong. The colors in Zothar's crystalline body began pulsing rapidly. The small Porvian made a sound that the translator didn't even attempt to convert. Other aliens in the room were showing signs that Jake's training told him indicated shock or alarm. Zothar's colors finally settled into a pattern, and the translator spoke. What it said made no sense to Jake at first. Zothar asked how humanity had survived on such a world. Jake looked at Linda and saw his own confusion reflected in her face. He asked Zothar to explain. The Velcrin's response changed everything. Zothar said that Earth was a death world. The term confused Jake until Zothar began listing facts. Earth's gravity was twice what the Galactic Council considered standard for inhabited worlds. The atmospheric pressure at sea level would crush most civilized species within hours. The oxygen content in the air was so high, it was toxic to the majority of council members. Earth's sun produced dangerous levels of radiation that required biological shielding to survive. The planet experienced violent weather patterns including hurricanes, tornadoes, and blizzards. It had active tectonic plates that caused earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. It was regularly struck by meteors. The temperature variations between seasons and between day and night were extreme. The list went on and on. Jake felt like he was hearing about a different planet. This was Earth, this was home, this was normal. He said as much to Zothar. The Velcrin's colors shifted to what the translator indicated was deep concern mixed with confusion. Zothar asked to see images of a typical Velcrin world and the display changed. Jake found himself looking at a planet with soft pink skies. According to the data, the gravity was half of Earth's. The atmosphere was thin and gentle. The weather was predictable and calm. There were no tectonic movements. The temperature stayed within a narrow, comfortable range all year round. It looked peaceful and safe and utterly boring to Jake's eyes. Linda was running calculations on her tablet, her fingers flying over the screen. She looked up with wide eyes and confirmed what Zothar was saying. By Galactic Council standards, Earth was classified as a Class 9 hazard world. Only Class 10 worlds were considered more dangerous, and those were things like planets with constant volcanic activity, or worlds with atmospheres made of acid. Humans lived on a planet that most alien species would consider a nightmare. The small Porvian, whose name was Kresh, spoke up for the first time. Its voice through the translator was high and nervous. It asked how humans had evolved on such a hostile world. Linda started to explain about adaptation and evolution, but Kresh interrupted. It said that most species evolved on stable worlds and developed civilization through cooperation and peace. Earth sounded like it would force species into constant survival mode. How had humans found time to develop art and music and science when they were fighting to survive every day? Jake thought about that question. He thought about his childhood in Colorado where winter could kill you if you weren't prepared. He thought about his aunt in Florida who had survived 3 hurricanes. He thought about his friend who lived in California and dealt with earthquakes like they were minor inconveniences. He thought about farmers who worked in heat that could cause heat stroke, and fishermen who went out on oceans that could swallow their boats. He realized that to humans all of this was just normal life. They had never known anything different. He tried to explain this to the assembled aliens. He said that humans didn't think of Earth as dangerous. It was just home. Yes, the weather could be severe, but they built sturdy houses and had warning systems. Yes, earthquakes happened, but they designed buildings to withstand them. Yes, the sun's radiation was strong, but their skin had adapted over millions of years to handle it. Every challenge Earth presented had become something humans learned to overcome or live with. It had made them strong and adaptable, but they had never realized just how strong or how adaptable until this moment. Zothar's colors shifted through several patterns before settling on one the translator said indicated thoughtful consideration. The Velcrin said that this explained much about the human delegation. It said that from the moment the humans had entered the station, the medical sensors had been giving unusual readings. Human bone density was 3 times what would be expected for their body size. Their muscle structure was redundant and overpowered for their frame. Their cardiovascular systems could operate at pressures that would rupture the blood vessels of most species. Their healing factor was remarkable, with tissue regeneration capabilities usually only seen in military-grade augmented species. Zothar said the humans weren't just visitors from a death world. They were built like weapons,